Okay, today we're going to talk about 5 things that people worry about, or maybe they should worry about when they're thinking about buying a business. This came up recently because I spoke to some potential clients who were thinking about buying something, and they contacted me to put together a document for them to buy this business, but it actually wasn't the right kind of document. We'll talk about that issue in a second. But it got me thinking about how sometimes there's another path to owning your own business, which is take over something that somebody else has already put the hard work into, right? You don't necessarily have to start from scratch. So that brings us to the first thing that you want to think about when you're buying a business. What is it that you're buying? Now, for something like a franchise or a brick and mortar type of business, you're gonna look for things like, is there a contract that you need to have assigned to you? Is there a physical location? Is there equipment that you're gonna want to take over that's necessary to run the business? What is it that you're buying? Is there inventory? I worked on a deal one time, it was a bunch of convenience stores, and one of the hot topics we shorthanded to, "Are the Twinkies stale?" So, because the business relied on inventory, what the buyer was purchasing was the inventory that was in the stores, and so we had to look at everything and make sure that they weren't buying a bunch of stale Twinkies, right? Because that was part of what they were paying for, right? So you wanna make sure that what you're getting is actually good. If you're buying something where the existing contracts are a big part of what you're buying, maybe long-term services agreements, right? What is it that you're basing the value of that business on? Is it long-term client agreements? Is it physical inventory? Is it a location like a building or a storefront? Is that building owned or leased? What is it that you're buying? Which brings us to number 2. Who is selling that and who is buying? A lot of times, first thing people do when they think about starting a business is create an LLC. And we've done other videos on when and why that might be the right answer for your business. But you also want to know who is selling and do they own what they're selling you. So, for instance, let's say you're buying a business and a critical piece of equipment you think is owned by the business and included, or IP. There's critical IP that you need to run the business. Does the LLC that is the seller own that, or is it the individual who's the member of that LLC who owns it, right? You can trip up on this pretty easily if you don't ask some questions that you think are going to be obvious and maybe even dumb, like, hey, does your business actually own this asset, right? But asking that question tells you things like, is it owned by the right entity or person? Who needs to assign that or sell it to you? Maybe it's got a big lien on it and they don't really own it outright. Maybe it's leased. You need to know, are you buying the ownership? Are you taking assignment of a lease obligation or a payment obligation, right? These are questions you need to ask. Who is buying and who is selling? What are you buying? Um, Number 3 that I like to think about is related to that, which is, does the business itself have any debt or any obligations that you need to know of? I was working on one a couple of years ago that was a transfer of a franchise, and the current franchisee owed a lot of money to the parent, the franchisor company, right? Um, Part of the reason they were selling that business was because they couldn't keep up with the franchise payments. So you need to know if there's a debt that's expected to come along with the business. You don't want to start behind the finish line without knowing that that's where you are and having a plan for that. Which brings us to the next thing you want to think about, which is cash flow and working capital. When you're thinking about buying somebody else's business, you're probably thinking a lot about the purchase price, but you want to think about that purchase price in terms of, will you have money to run the business once you own it? That initial purchase price is just going to be part of what you need. If there are employees that are going to come with the business, do you have money to make payroll until your plan says you're going to be bringing in enough money to cover payroll, right? Can you pay yourself? Can you make lease payments and pay for equipment and supplies? Do you have a plan for the cash flow, and have you reserved enough out of your resources to pay the purchase price and to operate for a few months until you've got steady revenue coming in? The profit is in the buying, as my mom used to say, right? If you overpay for something on the front end, it's very difficult to make that up later on. Very difficult. Not impossible, but it's hard. So your profitability starts in knowing that you're paying the right purchase price for the business. And then the last thing that sort of encompasses all of that is, do you have the right documents to document that purchase of the business, right? So sometimes somebody will come to me. I had a professional musician years ago who was getting out of the professional musician business. And so he was selling his very expensive concert instrument, right? It was a string bass that was, I think the purchase price was like 35K for this thing. It was a professional symphony musician instrument. And so for him, we didn't need a big, lengthy purchase agreement, a bill of sale that showed that the ownership was transferring the purchase price, who it was going to. That was enough for that instance. Contrast that with somebody who's buying an ongoing business, like a storefront that sells product. You're going to want, or provides a service, you're going to want a purchase agreement for that business where the seller make certain promises to you called representations, where they promise that the business, the books and records are accurate, right? If you've looked at their books and you're relying on that income, that revenue to set your purchase price, you need to know those numbers are good. They rep to you that all the equipment you need to run the business is going with the business. Maybe they rep there's no debts of the business that they haven't disclosed, that there's no lawsuits pending. There are things that you want them, the seller, to tell you are correct so that you can start from zero, right? You don't want to start behind the start line. And that happens in the right set of documents to create the sale for that business. So there are lots of things to think through when you're considering whether to buy someone else's business or start your own from scratch. But these are a few that you want to think about as you get started.